Made in New Orleans is underwritten by Art Plus Design Magazine, New Orleans Auction Galleries, and New Orleans Living Magazine.
Hi folks, I'm Steve Martin. Welcome to another episode of Made in New Orleans. Today we have an amazing opportunity to visit with Thomas Bruno, and later Marion McCollam tells us about her jewelry. But first let's watch Thomas sculpt in his studio.
I was born and raised in New Orleans. My grandfather was a cabinet maker. He came here in the early 20s after the World War I, and he established a cabinet shop during the Depression. When I was a child, he would have us go to the shop and do work for him, finishing and that sort of thing. So that was my first introduction to doing art. We didn't think of it that way at the time, that's for sure. My father really, he just wanted us to stay out of trouble. We're in the midst of something that's so exciting and so vital. People coming into this town who really love this city because of what it is. I mean, think about that. They love it. They love us. I love this city. I love it so much. That is New Orleans. We are on our way towards that. We are perfecting, we are rarefying, we are building up a beautiful city again. I really didn't believe that I could be an artist. I mean, when we would work in the shop, we were just doing what my father told us to do. My goodness, the idea that I could make art just was inconceivable. I went to school and I studied literature, and I was very passionate about reading and novels and poetry. So I wrote poetry, and I just dreamed of being a writer. When I got out of school, I just thought, well, I'll just go start drawing, and I don't know where this will lead me, but that's how I really started to get involved in it. And as I got deeper into that, I realized, well, you know what? I could do this. I really can. I can draw. I can learn how to do this. And then the next thing I learned was sculpture. I went to the academy and started working up figures, and I remember talking to my father about it. My father said, well, that's impossible, because to him it was inconceivable. How do you do that, you know? I wanted more. I started taking drawing class. What the heck? Who am I to think that I should be doing that? But I just started doing it. And I was married, I had kids, the responsibility of that, but it just seemed like such a natural thing to do. I think when I started to study the human figure, again, it was like coming home. When you talk about the human figure, it's right in your face. I mean, when the face does this as opposed to that, your shoulders do this instead of that. It was only much, much, much later deeply into my sculptural studies that I realized that I've been doing this all along. I've always been here. I never left. What's wonderful about being an artist is that you can concretize all this stuff. It really is tangible. And again, I like the idea of activating all the senses, of getting everybody involved. As a sculptor, it just gave me yet another reason to express all this wonderful sense of passion and devotion to the human story. That I'm really, in a sense, marrying this person on a very deep emotional level, and we becoming very intimate. We're buddies, we're friends. And that's very, very important to me. I desperately need to like and love my models. I love my models. I love the people that I sculpt. It's very, very, very important to me that I feel that way. It's very involved and convoluted and complicated. Start with the clay. Got to you sculpt it up to a satisfactory level of finish. Then you need to make a mold. You do some sculpting on the waxes too. And then you go to investment, which is another mold. So you make two molds. One mold which you don't destroy, and then the investment mold is the mold that's destroyed. That mold is made on top of the wax, and then that's put into the kiln and burnt out. All the wax is removed. And then you pull the investment out and you do the pour. What I've done is apply that same kind of principle to the human body. Did a lot of study in anatomy, try and memorize the anatomical form, try and conjure it up without looking at anything outside, try and visualize it inside and bring it out. And that's helped me to really kind of to tap in to that quiet inside myself.
Welcome back. We're here with Thomas Bruno. Thomas, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's jump in and start at the beginning. You're a sculptor, and you sculpt in bronze. Mm-hmm. How did you end up here? I know we talked about earlier you working with your father, building furniture and learning craftsmanship. But tell me what of that led to you being specifically where you are now.
Right. Well, when I was making furniture, I was deeply interested in the ornamentation and the kind of flamboyant aspects of the furniture designs that we were doing, and so I wanted to explore that. I wanted to learn how to carve specifically, and cabinet makers don't traditionally carve. They do joinery. They make the boxes basically, right. And so I didn't really know where to go, what to do in order to find that. So I looked around here, there, and everywhere, and realized that I was really going to have to kind of venture out. And so I started taking sculpture classes, doing drawing classes, and just started carving on my own, wood carving on my own. And that's what led me to get involved with sculpture, and more specifically involved with the figure, because
Right.
I went to the New Orleans Academy of Fine Arts, where the figure is really kind of at the core of what they do over there.
Curriculum.
So that one thing led to another, and here I am now working almost exclusively in sculpture, not so much in wood.
Who were your major influences in getting you started in this?
Well, of course, there's Kinsey Branham, who used to teach at the New Orleans Academy of Fine Arts. He was the sculptor instructor over there at the time, and he was quite wonderful in being able to kind of lay out the process of how you build up a figure in clay.
Right. And over that, any of the old masters, I mean, the figure has been in art for a long, long time.
Oh my goodness, as far as the great ones,
Right.
Well, Michelangelo, of course. When I was a kid, I just thought he was the most, and still do. I mean, I think he is the greatest sculptor that ever lived. And I remember as a kid just longing to see more of his sculpture.
Right.
And being frustrated that there weren't more examples of it. I always felt that why aren't there more of his pieces? Now I understand why. They took so long, first of all, and of course he was also thrown into other projects at no fault of his own.
Well, the interesting thing that happened too when we were growing up was there was a pulling away from sculpting and painting the figure
Right.
and going into abstraction.
Right.
And people really started to kind of look at figurative work as kind of an antiquated way of producing art.
That's right.
And so through the time period that you and I have been artists, we both work in the figure. Why are
Right.
you in
Right.
bronze? It's kind of been fighting against the grain of what the trends in the art world are.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Is all I can say about it. Just unbelievable. It's like a tyranny.
Right.
You feel like you've been through an espionage. You're a secret spy trying to get back to your homeland. It was so difficult and so frustrating at first in the '80s when I first started getting involved in the art community and bumping against the prejudices, the hostility.
You know, but what's cool about that is that it really shows as an artist what an artist is about. You find
Right.
what you like
have
to
to
do.
you have to latch on. I like to think of it as a bulldog. You bite and you don't let go.
Right, and you just keep doing it because you like to
That's
do it.
right. And well, I mean, there's a parallel story in the furniture too, because what my father was doing, my grandfather was doing, was making traditional 18th century furniture.
Right.
And so I was kind of raised in an atmosphere where the hell with the rest sort of a thing. You know, it all depends on what side of the fence you're on. If you're hanging around traditionalists, then obviously the modernists are the radicals. And if you're hanging around the radicals, then the traditionalists tend to be the enemy, the people on the outside. So it all depends on where you're sitting at the time, and that's really been my experience, that I find both schools to be very narrow-minded and kind of very limited in what they think about art. And I've really come to realize that the most important thing is to appreciate what you have before you, whether it's a Picasso or a Le Corbusier or Michelangelo.
It all comes down to
My
what you
goodness,
like.
there's room in this world for everybody, folks. You don't have to push these people out of the room in order to have a conversation with someone.
Right.
I mean, there's a big world out there.
So given that, you've made a success of going against the grain and creating a figurative work in bronze, which is a very laborious process.
Yeah, I think that has more to do with my personal story than it has to do with the kind of this macro story of art history. In furniture, it's very laborious, very time-consuming and consuming, and very tedious.
Right.
So that is a perfect atmosphere in which to kind of develop my abilities in the figure.
Right.
By training in that kind of apprenticeship atmosphere, I was well suited to jump on over to what I do in the figure.
Now, a lot of your figurative work is based on portraiture, where you actually have people that you sculpt their portrait.
Yeah.
Tell us about that process, because it's different than, maybe sitting for a painting.
Right.
You have to sit. I know from being a sculptor that taking a photograph of someone and then working from that, you don't get the 3D that you need to really get the figure right.
Yeah, and remember also, a photograph is one angle.
Right.
I mean, in a most
it's a
desperate
2D
kind of a
flat.
way. One angle in lighting, one angle in the angle of the camera, the angle of the head, and it's how it's disposed. So you're getting just a very, very snapshot glimpse of that reality.
And the flatness of the photograph translates.
Well,
if you're trying to
that's
do
the issue of shadowing, right? I mean, we don't really perceive 3 dimensions from when you get back 2-3 feet. We're dependent on shadows.
Right.
We're dependent on all kinds of the tricks of the trade, if you will, in order to perceive the sense of depth. It's a problem. It's a profound problem, but it's the problem of seeing.
Right.
It's not just the problem of sculpting. We deal with this problem every time we bump into, we go into a room where there's not enough sufficient light. We have to grope our way around. So that's, in a sense, what we do as sculptors. We have to create a methodology for finding out where everything is in this darkened room where there's not sufficient light.
Right.
And whether we have a photograph or a room full of photographs, or we have the model or we don't have the model, we're still confronted with the same basic problem. The problem of I hate to say recreating the image,
well, it's
because
your interpretation
because you're always interpreting reality. Whether you're an artist or not, you're still interpreting the things that are around you. You're making sense. You're taking information in and you're reassembling it in your brain, and then you're making sense of it.
Right.
And this process is something you do every day, whether you think about it or not.
Right.
It's just with art, you have to be acutely aware of the process because you're required to create a product out of that.
Right.
And so, and people are going to be examining that product. You're not just creating the product and throwing it in the closet. You're creating the product and then you're putting it out there and having people look at it
and they're bringing their
criticize
whole set of preconceived ideas of what it should be.
Oh
into
my
the
goodness,
mix, too.
when you bring the sculpture into the family and everybody responds to, everybody knows Aunt Mildred and they have a sense of what she is and what she meant to them. And the sculpture, of course, is one particular aspect of her. The sculpture can't be everything to everybody.
Right.
So there has to be some sort of a basic call the artist first of all makes about what do I want to talk about, and what can I talk about?
Right.
If I'm talking about the more serious side of Aunt Mildred, obviously I'm not going to have her cavorting and laughing and throwing her head back. And
Right.
These are basic fundamental calls about what the piece is going to be about.
Right.
To say one thing is not to say another.
Let's jump from that and go to the process of actually creating this. We've seen a good bit of you in the studio working on the models, the clay,
Right.
the pouring of the bronze and such. Give us some take of those different stages that you go through. And
Okay, the process.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I model the sculpture, and I usually work in clay because it's the most malleable, the most congenial medium for me. I can work quickly. I can make changes fairly easily. Those are all things that make it handy to use. Then once the sculpture is sufficiently worked up, then I make a mold of it. And the mold can be made the traditional way with plaster. It can be made with modern technologies like rubber and various plastics that we have. But the long and short of it is that we're making a representation, we're making a recording of what we have in
Right.
clay. Once we have our mold, then we have to decide what kind of medium we're going to cast the piece in. We can cast it in plaster, we can cast it in wax, we can cast it in concrete, we can cast it in plastic. There's all different kinds of materials that you can use in order to cast the sculpture and preserve it. I like to use bronze because bronze is beautiful, first of all. It lasts a long time.
You can put different patinas.
And it has a certain stature associated with it. There's nothing as cool as a piece of metal that you know it's going to last and last. So these are all wonderful things, and there's the issue of color too. So in order to get to the bronze, you're going to need to make another casting in wax. Now that's where folks kind of get confused, because what actually has to happen is that wax casting has to be destroyed. And so you make another mold in addition to the one you had already that made the wax casting, and that mold is what's going to actually take the bronze. So you're going to make a flask, and you're going to put the wax casting inside, and the material is going to surround it both inside and outside of the wax casting. And then you're going to melt the wax out. You're going to remove the wax.
Right.
And any moisture that you might have in the investment. Investment is another word for the mold. And that mold is going to be made in plaster and sand and some sort of light material. And in any case, once you've burned that out and got all the wax out, then you're ready to pour the bronze in. So you put the flask on the floor and you wrap it all nice and tight so that bronze doesn't leak out. And then you pour the bronze in. And basically, that's the way we've been doing it for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And then once you have your casting, then there's a whole nother process of working the bronze, because it comes out and it's all messy and things. There are all kinds of materials on the surface and so forth that need to be removed.
So you have to finish it.
So you have to finish it. You have to chase it. In the old days, we did that by hand, and nowadays we have modern tools and things. But it comes down to the same thing. You have to chase it in a way that you preserve what you want to preserve, and you want to lose what you want to lose.
How can people get in touch? Your studio's on Tchoupitoulas. What's the address?
My studio is the 3501 Tchoupitoulas Street.
Now, if someone wants to commission you to do a sculpture of themselves or someone else, how's the best way to go about that?
Well, you can get me online, thomasbruno.com, as a contact sheet on that webpage. Also, I have an email, brunosculpture@yahoo.com. But also, you can just stop by my studio, Thomas Bruno Studio. I'm there during regular office hours, and or just look me up in the phone book, Thomas Bruno. I'm very easy to get to.
Sounds good. Thomas, thank you so much for all that you've explained and letting us come into your studio and watch your work. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Steve, for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome, man. Thank you. All right.
All righty.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more.
Weeknights at midnight on LAE.
We're back with Marion McCollam, jewelry designer and founder of Marion Cage Jewelry. Marion, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Well, look, let's talk about basically you and how you got started.
Well, I have a background in architecture,
Right.
so I've been practicing, and I still practice architecture, and I got into jewelry really as a hobby. It's not infrequent for architects to have something else that they do besides architecture,
Right.
because I think at the basis we really love working with our hands.
Was that something that you developed in school or after you came out and actually started practicing as an architect?
It was after. It was after. I just took a night class
Right.
at an art school, and one thing led to another, and here I am.
Well, you had an interaction with a very famous architect that does furniture design and all sorts of really wild, crazy stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about that interaction, that relationship?
I worked for Zaha Hadid, and she's actually the only female to have ever won the Pritzker Prize, and it was actually an incredible experience. She's a brilliant architect and designer, and she has somewhat of a reputation for being a bit hot-headed, but she's actually a very nurturing person, and she was an incredible mentor.
We had a lot of interaction with her in Miami because she worked closely with Craig Robbins and a lot of the hotels and big installations down there. She had some amazing stuff, and I see that fluid form that she has, and you have a fluid form in your design. I know that architecture and jewelry probably have some relations in just the fact that they're structural, but you have a very natural, simple, easy flow to your jewelry. Tell how that developed.
The way I look at jewelry, I mean, it's sort of like architecture for the body.
Right.
And so
right.
a lot of my design is driven by the curves of a woman's body, how something sits. I mean, when I'm working on a piece, I often put it on and wear it for a while just to see how it looks, how it interacts with the bones and the structure of the architecture of your body.
Well, you interact and collaborate with other craftsmen to create things in your line as well.
Yeah, I actually recently collaborated with a painter, Jill Moser, who's from New York City, and we've worked on 2 projects now together where we base the core of the design on her actual artwork. And there's an interplay between her initial piece and my interpretation of that, which has been really interesting for both of us.
Cool. There's a difference also in making jewelry and being an architect and actually having a business to run.
Yes.
Give me your experiences in the business of jewelry and how that differs from maybe the practice of architecture.
Well, I mean, one thing is it's a lot faster. Architecture takes a long time.
Right.
So there's something rather satisfying about that because I get a lot of immediate gratification. I can make things a lot faster. But at the same time, architecture it's a lot more substantial in a lot of ways.
Right.
So it sort of feeds another part of my brain, so to speak.
Right, right. And you have a shop on Magazine Street. That's where your business is.
That's right. The retail portion's in the front of the space, and then my architecture studio, and then all the jewelry fabrication happens in the back.
Right. So you get to actually just kind of live in the environment of creating, and you also have to give a call out to your dog.
Yes, Whistler. Yes, it's not uncommon for people to come in my store just to see him.
Yeah, he kind of sleeps in the front and greets you when he walks in.
That's right.
What's a typical day like for you in that environment?
Well, it's because I have the luxury of having my studio in the back. Some days I'll spend most of my time in the back working on either architecture projects, fabrication. I may be working on a new collection. Right now I've been working on a collection of architectural hardware, which is cabinetry hardware, and it's produced the same way my jewelry is. It's just sort of a bump up in scale.
Tell me, in the process of making the jewelry, we've done an article on you before in the magazine, and I've seen a little bit about the process, but tell us about the cuffs that you make and the cutting and the lasering and do you do poured pieces that are give us a little bit about the
well, I use a variety of fabrication techniques. In the case of laser cutting, the actual technique of fabricating the piece was what drove the design.
Right.
For example, it's primarily a two-dimensional process, so I looked at lots of graphic motifs to get inspired. for the designs, whereas the rest of my work is a lot more sculptural in nature. So it's usually produced by the process of lost wax casting.
Right.
And that involves actually sculpting or fabricating an original by which the multiples are made thereafter.
Do you do that in clay or wax or
It
what?
depends. It depends on what the end product is. Sometimes I carve wax. Sometimes I use a found object.
Okay.
And then I incorporate other materials with that.
Speaking of materials, is there something that you favor over another as far as material goes? Stone, wood, things like that?
Well, it's interesting because when I started the jewelry, I started with using a lot of exotic hardwoods. And I think that has to do a lot with my background as an architect.
You can build stuff out of it.
Yeah, and I love wood. At the time, I was actually sharing a studio with my brother in New York City, and he is a guitar maker as a hobby. So I was using a lot of his scrap wood to do some of my first pieces.
Well, that brings up something, and kind of jumping back. You went to Columbia.
Yes.
In architecture, which is a really good thing. Right?
Yeah.
And you spent a lot of time in New York. Tell us about the difference between living and working in New York and living and working in New Orleans.
You know, the funny thing is I never would have anticipated this, but since I've moved back, I find that I have so much more time to do more.
Right.
New York is wonderful, but it sort of has this frenetic pace,
Right.
and it can be very distracting in a wonderful way. But I find that sort of the quiet of New Orleans allows me just more time to think and reflect and actually do my work.
Right, and you're from Louisiana.
I'm from New Orleans originally,
Okay,
born and
okay.
raised. Yes.
How did that influence what you're doing now?
You know, I think a lot of people take for granted just the beautiful aesthetic environment that we grow up around. If we
Right.
grow up here in New Orleans, not a lot of American cities are as stunningly beautiful.
Right, right. Or as interesting.
Exactly, and I think that growing up here, if you are constantly exposed to that, you get a sort of innate sense of proportion and beauty that just by being exposed to it, it just sort of, I think, heightens your awareness of those things.
Right. In your process now, living and working here, are you now pushing back out into the country in different places? Are you doing anything outside of New Orleans?
Yeah, I sell wholesale
Okay.
to boutiques all over the country, in Canada and in Europe and in Asia. And I actually had the wholesale business before I started my shop here.
Okay.
So that continues, and now I'm branching out into cabinetry hardware, and that's also something that I'm doing across the country.
And that's what's new. Is there any other new projects that you're working on?
Yeah, I come out with 2 collections a year, and my spring collection is just coming out now. I worked with a wood turner
Okay.
on it, and what's interesting about it to me is it combines 2 materials that I love working with, metal and wood. And so there are beautifully crafted pieces that were made by the wood turner, and then I combine those with some cast pieces.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, tell us how people can come see all this new stuff, your spring collection.
So we'll be, the collection's in store now.
Right.
It's not yet on our website, but it will be in about a month.
What's your store address?
It's 3719 Magazine Street.
Okay, and what's your website?
It's www.marioncage.com.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming in today and telling us about all this stuff. I know I love seeing your jewelry. It's beautiful, and I know everybody else that would take a chance and come down and visit with you will be really pleased. So
Well, thank you for having me.
you're welcome. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after this.
You're watching WLAE, New Orleans Public Television. Find us on Cox Channel 14, Charter Channel 11 and 711, AT&T Channel 32 and 1032, Dish TV, DirecTV, and over-the-air broadcast on Channel 32.
It looks like we've run out of time. Thanks for joining us today, and remember to support the arts in your community. Until next time, I'm Steve Martin with Made in New Orleans.
Made in New Orleans is underwritten by Art Plus Design Magazine, New Orleans Auction Galleries, and New Orleans Living Magazine.